The Caribbean, October 1492. 3 ships under a Spanish flag. A magnetic compass on the navigator's table. Written charts. The full backing of the most powerful crown in Europe. Christopher Columbus steps onto a small island in the Bahamas and believes he has reached the coast of Asia. He is not even on the right continent. He will cross this ocean 4 more times. He will die without ever knowing where he was. Now rewind nearly 500 years. Newfoundland, the year 1021. A single Norse vessel. No compass, no chart, no royal fleet. 35 men in an open hull. And they know exactly where they are. They will build on this shore, forge iron, cut timber. Then they will do something Columbus never considered. They will pack their tools and leave, deliberately. This video is about how the Norse reached America 5 centuries before Europe noticed it existed. 2 ships, 2 systems. One had an empire behind it, the other had something better. And the final piece rewrites timeline entirely. To understand what the Norse pulled off, you need to stand where they stood. Not in Scandinavia, in Greenland, the year 985. A man named Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for killing a neighbor, leads 25 ships westward. The name Greenland was marketing. He knew what he was selling. Only 14 ships made it, survivors of the survivors. That was the founding population of the people who would one day reach America. By the late 10th century, 2 settlements clung to Greenland's southwestern coast. Combined population at peak, between 2,000 and 3,000 people. That's a village. Pinned against an ice sheet, 3,000 kilometers from anywhere else. But here is the detail that makes everything that follows make sense. Greenland had almost no trees, and Norse civilization ran on wood. Every house, every barn, every ship. Without timber, you don't build vessels. Without vessels, you don't get iron. You don't get out. You might think, wasn't there driftwood? Yes. Roughly half the wood in Greenland came from Siberian rivers, drifting across the Arctic. But driftwood is dead wood. Months in salt water leaves it brittle in the places that matter. For a keel, you need living timber cut yourself. There was none in Greenland. The colony was on a clock. The popular version says someone got lucky and stumbled onto America. That isn't what the evidence shows. Around 986, a Norse merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson was blown off course on his way to Greenland. He sighted a forested coastline, refused to land. He was looking for his father, not unknown shores, and turned back. But he reported it. 15 years later, Eric the Red Sun Leaf bought Bjarni's ship, not built one, bought the same vessel, and retraced the route in reverse. 3 landfalls: Helluland, the land of flat stones; Markland, the land of forests; Vinland, the land of wine. 4 expeditions followed across 20 years, each one building on what the last one learned. Columbus made one voyage on a hunch and got lucky. The Norse were running reconnaissance. Here is where the engineering matters. 2 vessels, same ocean, 2 completely different philosophies of how to survive it. Start with the Santa María, 18 meters long, 100 tons, a deep keel sitting over 2 meters below the waterline, heavy, stable in a swell, built for blue water. Columbus had 3 ships in his fleet, but the Santa María was the flagship, the biggest, the proudest, the one carrying the captain. Now picture a knarr, 16 meters long, 25 tons, a draft of roughly 1.5 meters, roughly a quarter of the Santa Maria's tonnage. Clinker-built, overlapping oak planks, fastened with iron rivets, sealed with tarred animal hair. The hull doesn't fight the wave, it flexes with it. We covered the engineering of that flex in our Roman ships video. And one thing worth saying clearly, a knarr is not a longship. Longships were built for war. The knarr was the cargo vessel. This was the ship that built the Norse Atlantic. Now, watch what happens when each vessel meets a coastline. The Santa María on Christmas Eve 1492 ran aground on a reef off the coast of what is now Haiti, not in a storm, in calm water. The ship that crossed the Atlantic could not survive a sandbar. The hull broke. Columbus had to abandon her on the beach and use her timbers to build a fort. He went home on a smaller ship. The flagship of the most famous voyage in European history never sailed again. The greatest navigator of his age lost his own ship within 10 weeks of reaching the Americas. Almost nobody talks about that. A knarr does not have that problem. With 1.5 meters of draft, you can run her straight up onto a beach, tilt her on her side, spend the winter under her hull as a windbreak. In spring, the tide and a few good men put her back in the water. The same hull, no dock, no port, no empire required. This is why Meadows exists exactly where it exists. A shallow bay, a flat shore, a perfect place to drag a knarr out of, the water. The Norse weren't choosing a colony site, they were choosing a place a knarr could live. The Spanish Navy was built on specialized power. The Norse Atlantic ran on adaptability. One came home in pieces, the other came home for 300 years. But adaptability gets you across the water. It doesn't tell you where you are when you arrive. The ship is only half the story. Knowing where you are is the other half. And this is where the gap between Columbus and the Norse becomes almost embarrassing. How the Norse crossed open ocean without a compass is its own story. We pulled it apart in another video on this channel. The sunstone, the shadow board, the bird logic. By the year 1000, the Norse could hit a target coastline within a day's sailing of where they aimed. Open ocean navigation was a solved problem. The harder problem was the one Vinland posed. An unknown coastline, no charts. You learn it the way a modern reconnaissance team learns hostile terrain. One survey at a time, building intelligence before any major commitment. Bjarne's accidental sighting in 986 gave them the first piece of intelligence. There was something out there. Leif's voyage around the year 1000 turned that sighting into geography. 3 coastlines, named in sequence, each name a resource report. Helluland for stone, Markland for forest, Vinland for grass and grapes. Then the second generation went back to test what the first had mapped. Could you winter there? Could you trade? Could you hold ground? That is not a treasure hunt. That is a survey program. Light, fast, repeatable. Picture a Norse sailor on his second voyage to Markland. He has memorized the bay shapes from the man who taught him, who learned them from the man who first saw them. There is no map on paper. The map is in his head, and it gets sharper with every crossing. Now compare. Columbus made 4 voyages to the Caribbean across 11 years. He died believing he had found a back route to Asia. He mapped a sea and called it the wrong ocean. How far south did the Norse actually push? Meadows is the northernmost confirmed site, but butternuts found there don't grow within hundreds of kilometers of Newfoundland. Somebody carried them back from much further down the coast. Some scholars think Norse crews reached the Gulf of Maine. Others stop at the St. Lawrence. My own read is that 3 centuries of timber traffic doesn't run on a single base camp. Where do you land on this one? For 900 years, nobody believed the sagas. Hero tales with geography sprinkled in, scholars said. No serious historian expected to find physical proof. Then 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, the archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, arrive at the northern tip of Newfoundland. A local fisherman tells them about a group of strange, grassy ridges near a small bay. Nobody knows what they are. The Ingstads start digging. What comes out of the ground rewrites the discovery of the Americas. Sod walls over timber frames, a building style anyone who had seen a Norse Greenland farm would recognize immediately. A smithy with iron slag, proof that someone had been smelting bog iron and forging nails on this shore. A bronze cloak pin, unmistakably Scandinavian, and a spindle whorl, a small thing, but it changes everything. Spindle whorls mean spinning. Spinning means women. This was not a raiding camp. This was a settlement with families in it. But here is the detail that proves Meadows wasn't actually Vinland itself. The diggers found butternuts, a nut whose northern limit is far down in the St. Lawrence Valley, hundreds of kilometers from this site. Somebody carried them back. This site wasn't a destination, it was a forward operating base. The shallow bay for hauling out ships, the smithy producing rivets for repairs. Nothing about it says, "We are staying." Everything says, "We are running operations from here." Over 800 artifacts came out of that ground. The Norse crossed the Atlantic without a single chart and left behind enough evidence to fill a museum. As it turns out, the hard part was never finding America. It was convincing everyone else it had happened. For decades, one question lingered. When exactly were the Norse here? Radiocarbon dating said around the year 1000, give or take 50 years, not sharp enough. Then, in 2021, a research team at the University of Groningen found a way to fix the date, down to a single year. They examined 3 pieces of wood from the site, all bearing cut marks from metal blades. The key was a cosmic event nobody on Earth in 993 even noticed. That year, a massive solar storm flooded the planet with charged particles. The radiation left a signature spike in tree rings worldwide. A cosmic timestamp burned into every living tree at the same instant. The Groningen team found that 993 spike in all 3 samples. Then they counted outward. 28 growth rings to the bark edge. 993 plus 28. The year 1021. 3 trees, 1 date, published in Nature. The most precise date in all of pre-Columbian archaeology. The sagas weren't fireside stories. They were history. So they reached Vinland. They built a base. They forged iron. And then, here is the question almost nobody asks properly. Why didn't they stay? The popular answer is that the natives drove them out. The evidence says something else. The evidence says they ran the math. The sagas called the people they encountered Skraelings. The term was not respectful. These were almost certainly the ancestors of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, or related indigenous groups who had lived on that coast for thousands of years. The first contact was measured. The saga of the Greenlanders describes Norse settlers exchanging strips of red cloth for furs. Both sides cautious, both sides gaining. For a brief window, it worked. If you have ever been the stranger in a room where everyone knows the rules, where a handshake could mean welcome, or a wrong word could change everything, you understand the weight of those first exchanges. The Norse were managing that tension 3,000 miles from anyone who could help them. Then it broke. A weapon was reached for. A man was killed. Leif Eriksson's brother Thorvald died from a Skraeling arrow. the first known European to die by violence on American soil. What followed is the most ambitious Norse attempt to hold this continent, and the choice that broke it reveals the real reason Vinland was abandoned. If this kind of depth is what keeps you watching, a like genuinely helps the channel. Thorfinn Karlsefni arrived with 70 people, permanent settlement, women, livestock. Trade resumed briefly, then collapsed. The Norse had iron. The Skrælings wanted iron. Karlsefni faced a choice with no good answer. Trade weapons, grade metal, and arm the people most capable of destroying his colony. Refuse and watch trade evaporate. He refused. The skirmishes returned, and here is where the math closed in on him. The entire Norse population of Greenland was maybe 2,500 people. Karlsefni had 70 with him in Vinland, a 35th of everyone, children included. But in a colony that couldn't replace a single lost crew, even 70 was a bet the Norse couldn't afford to lose. 2,500 kilometers of icebergs between him and any reinforcement. Columbus had the Spanish Empire behind him. The Crown could absorb a lost ship and send 3 more. The Norse couldn't replace one. 70 people, 3,000 miles, no reinforcements coming. Karlsefni did the arithmetic every morning. He wasn't running from failure, he was running a sustainability analysis without a spreadsheet. And the way they left proves the point. No burned buildings, no graves. They disassembled what they could, loaded the ship, and pulled the iron nails out of the walls before they left. In Greenland, a handful of rivets was worth more than the building they came from. You want to understand Norse priorities? Watch what they carry home. Anyone who has ever pulled the plug on something that was working, because the math wasn't there to keep it going, knows the weight Karlsefni was carrying. He wasn't retreating. He was respecting the numbers. That might be the most Viking quality in this entire story. Most accounts of Norse America stop at Meadows. Here is what almost nobody mentions. In the year 1126, on the southwestern coast of Greenland, masons began laying red sandstone for a cathedral, 27 meters long. Stained glass, a bell tower, dedicated to St. Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors. 366 years before Columbus stepped onto a Caribbean beach, the first Christian cathedral in the Western Hemisphere was already standing on American soil. Its name was Gardar, and the timber that held its roof up came from a forest the rest of Europe didn't know existed. In 2023, an Icelandic archaeologist named Elisabeth Gudmundsdottir published a study of over 8,000 wood fragments from medieval Norse Greenland. 26 were hemlock and jack pine, 2 species with a geographic fingerprint as precise as a passport. Neither tree grew in Europe. Neither could drift across the ocean. For that wood to be in those buildings, human hands had to cut it, and human ships had to carry it across the Davis Strait. And the dates on those fragments span 3 centuries. The Norse weren't making one legendary trip. They were running a transatlantic timber route for longer than the United States has existed as a country. There is one written record of these crossings. In 1347, an Icelandic chronicle notes that a small ship, 17 men aboard, arrived in Iceland after being blown off course. They had sailed from Greenland to Markland for timber. And here is what the chronicler thought was newsworthy. Not that Norse crews were sailing to America. That was routine. The news was that this particular ship had been blown so far off course. By 1347, sailing to America for wood was so unremarkable that the only reason it made the historical record was a navigation error. So why does history remember Columbus and forget the Norse? Not because of who arrived first, the evidence is settled on that. It's because of what survived the journey home. Columbus had a printing press waiting in Europe to broadcast his reports. A monarchy funding return voyages. The Norse had firelight. Sagas carried in memory, not on paper. Every family carries something like this. A skill that lived in someone's hands. A story that died with the last person who could tell it properly. The Norse lost a hemisphere that way. Not because they failed, because the people who could tell the story ran out before the printing press existed. This channel exists for the stories that didn't get the credit. The engineering, the discipline, the intelligence behind how these people crossed an ocean and walked away from a continent with their dignity intact. If that's the kind of history you came here to find, you know what to do. The real measure of an explorer isn't whether he stays. It's whether he understands what he's found. Columbus reached a continent and called it the wrong name. The Norse reached it, named it correctly, mapped it, used it for 300 years, and walked away with their discipline intact. One of them got the statues. The other one got the truth.